The story of Audie Murphy, America's most decorated soldier, is a tale that begins with bravery, hardship, and extraordinary courage, but ends in suspicion and mystery. On the morning of May 28, 1971, Murphy boarded a small Aero Commander plane at Martinsville Airport in Virginia, a routine flight that would never reach its destination. Just 14 minutes after takeoff, the plane crashed into Brush Mountain, killing Murphy and all 5 passengers instantly. For decades, the official story has been that this was a tragic accident caused by bad weather or pilot error, a sad but mundane event in the unforgiving Appalachian terrain. However, over time, evidence has emerged suggesting that Murphy's death may not have been an accident at all. Witnesses reported hearing a mid-air explosion seconds before the crash, and forensic analysis of the wreckage later revealed stress patterns on the elevator control surfaces inconsistent with damage from impact, implying pre-crash failures. Investigators found that several critical components were missing from the crash site, pieces that could have explained what went wrong, yet were never recovered. Adding to the mystery are accounts of 2 men in maintenance coveralls seen in the hang of the night before the crash, working on Murphy's plane without being on the schedule, and disappearing into the night. They were never officially identified, and no FAA record of their inspection exists. Murphy's widow, Pamela, always expressed doubt about the official narrative, noting that her husband, an experienced soldier who had survived the most intense combat of World War II, would never have trusted a pilot who took unnecessary risks. It seems that for Murphy, a man whose life had always been about survival against overwhelming odds, this flight should have been routine. Instead, the circumstances surrounding it raised questions about whether Murphy's death was orchestrated, possibly to silence him, a man who had recently begun investigating government programs that targeted vulnerable veterans. This blend of heroism, suspicion, and conspiracy has kept the story of Murphy's death alive in the public imagination for over 50 years, and it continues to inspire both admiration for his service and curiosity about what really happened in those fatal minutes on Brush Mountain. Audie Leon Murphy was born in 1925 in Hunt County, Texas, into a world defined by poverty and hardship. He was the 7th of 12 children, and his family lived as sharecroppers, working long hours in the fields for minimal pay. Life was not merely difficult. It was brutal. By the time Murphy was 8, he was already hunting small game to help feed his siblings, learning early on that survival depended on courage, resourcefulness, and relentless effort. By age 10, he was picking cotton alongside adults, enduring the scorching Texas sun for just pennies, learning lessons about endurance and responsibility that would shape his character forever. His father had abandoned the family, and when Murphy was 16, his mother passed away, leaving him to care for what remained of his large, struggling family. There was no luxury of childhood in the Murphy household. There was only work, hardship, and a constant fight to survive. Education became secondary to survival, and by the age of 12, he had permanently left school, understanding that in his family, the weak did not thrive. This upbringing instilled in Murphy extraordinary resilience, a sense of duty to others, and a refusal to quit under any circumstances. These early challenges also forged the qualities that would later make him an exceptional soldier, a combination of courage, ingenuity, and unshakable determination. When the United States entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Murphy tried to enlist immediately, eager to serve his country. At just 17, however, he was initially rejected by multiple branches of the military because of his small stature. He stood only 5 feet 5 inches and weighed about 112 pounds. The Marines turned him away. The Navy refused him, and even specialized paratrooper units rejected him. Yet Murphy's determination would not be deterred, and he eventually found a place in the Army infantry, where standards were finally lowered just enough to allow him in. From that point on, his life would be defined by extraordinary achievement and near impossible feats. Over the course of 27 months, he fought in 9 major campaigns, consistently placing himself in situations of extreme danger. He killed hundreds of enemy soldiers in close combat, faced life-threatening injuries, and repeatedly demonstrated bravery that earned him every combat award available, including the Medal of Honor. His military record is astonishing not only for its scope, but also for the personal risk he faced in every engagement. Despite these remarkable accomplishments, what truly set Murphy apart was his honesty about the psychological toll of war. At a time when discussing feelings or trauma was considered weakness, Murphy openly admitted to suffering from nightmares, insomnia, and a reliance on sleeping pills. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, knowing that some part of him remained in combat, always vigilant for the next threat. This openness about his struggles, combined with his extraordinary heroism, made him both a national icon and a figure who would eventually become inconvenient to those in power. It was his ability to survive, understand danger, and refuse to remain silent that would later make him a threat in the eyes of certain government agencies. The skills and values Murphy developed as a child in rural Texas, the toughness born from poverty, the sense of responsibility for others, the refusal to quit, would all converge during his military career and beyond, ultimately shaping not only the man who won the nation's admiration, but also the man whose life and death would be shrouded in mystery and suspicion. Audie Murphy's military career is one of the most extraordinary stories of bravery in American history. After finally enlisting in the Army infantry at just 17, he quickly proved that his size and youth did not limit his courage, determination, or skill. Over the next 27 months, Murphy fought in 9 major campaigns across Europe, from the fierce battles in Italy to the bloody fields of France and Germany. What makes his record almost unbelievable is not just the number of enemy combatants he engaged, but the closeness of the combat itself. Murphy was not directing artillery from a safe distance or observing from the rear lines. He was in the thick of the fighting, seeing the faces of enemy soldiers as he fought them, often in hand-to-hand or point-blank encounters. He was wounded multiple times, but continued to fight, demonstrating a resilience and fearlessness that earned him every combat decoration the United States could award, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and multiple Silver Stars and Bronze Stars. One of the most famous examples of his heroism occurred when he single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers while calling in artillery strikes on his own position, all while wounded in the leg. At just 19 years old, Murphy stood on a burning tank destroyer and faced death with an almost impossible calm. It was like standing on a box of dynamite, he later said, reflecting the understatement of someone who had stared directly into the abyss and refused to blink. Murphy's courage was not limited to physical combat. He possessed a remarkable ability to lead and inspire those around him. His men trusted him implicitly because they had seen him act decisively under fire, risking his own life repeatedly to save theirs. He became a symbol not just of bravery, but of leadership, resilience, and moral strength under conditions most people could not imagine. After the war, Murphy faced a difficult transition to civilian life, a challenge for many veterans who struggled to reconcile their wartime experiences with ordinary life. He moved to Hollywood and became an actor, bringing authenticity to the Western films in which he starred. His military experience lent a credibility to his roles, and audiences admired him not only as a war hero, but as a figure who embodied the qualities of courage, humility, and integrity. Yet even in Hollywood, Murphy never stopped confronting the realities of war. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he spoke openly about the psychological wound of combat, including nightmares, insomnia, and a dependence on sleeping pills to manage the lingering effects of trauma. He challenged the American myth that soldiers returned from war unscathed or that psychological wounds were a sign of weakness. This honesty was revolutionary at the time and made Murphy a figure of both admiration and discomfort. He became an advocate for veterans, visiting hospitals and learning directly from those struggling to adapt to civilian life after service. Murphy's experiences gave him a unique perspective. He had survived some of the most intense combat in history, yet he understood that the battle did not end on the battlefield. Psychological scars, institutional neglect, and bureaucratic indifference continued to threaten veterans long after the guns had fallen silent. It was this combination of first-hand heroism, moral authority, and insight into the struggles of returning soldiers that would later position Murphy as a powerful whistleblower, a man whose knowledge and credibility posed a potential threat to those in positions of authority. His military service had not only made him a national hero, but also a figure who could not be ignored, a man capable of uncovering uncomfortable truths and demanding accountability. In this sense, Murphy's life after the war, though glamorous in appearance, was intertwined with a deeper struggle, the ongoing fight for justice, the refusal to let the sacrifices of himself and his fellow soldiers be exploited or forgotten, and the courage to confront systems of power that many others might fear. These qualities, born from a childhood of hardship and forged in the crucible of war, set the stage for the final chapter of his life, a chapter that ended in tragedy, suspicion, and unanswered questions in the years following his military service and Hollywood career. Audie Murphy did not settle into a quiet life of fame and comfort. Instead, he dedicated himself to understanding and addressing the challenges faced by veterans returning to civilian life, particularly those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Murphy had begun working on a documentary project aimed at highlighting veterans' experiences, bringing attention to the gaps and failures within the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. His celebrity status, combined with his credibility as the nation's most decorated soldier, gave him access to hospitals, administrators, and veterans themselves in a way few outsiders could achieve. As he listened to the stories of these men and women, Murphy began noticing patterns that were alarming. Veterans described procedures they did not fully understand, treatments that left them worse off, and gaps in memory surrounding their hospital stays. While isolated incidents could be explained as miscommunication or confusion, Murphy began to notice that similar accounts were appearing across multiple facilities. The evidence was subtle at first, but it suggested a disturbing possibility that certain programs were using veterans, especially those with severe psychological trauma, as subjects for experiments without consent. Murphy's instincts, honed in both combat and investigative observation, told him this was not random. He began tracing funding streams, reviewing administrative records, and documenting the involvement of personnel with backgrounds in military intelligence or classified research. What he found was a network of programs that resembled the infamous MKUltra experiments conducted by the CIA during the Cold War. These programs allegedly involved methods of behavioral conditioning, memory manipulation, and psychological testing, all conducted under the guise of veteran care. What made Murphy's discovery especially dangerous, from a bureaucratic and political standpoint, was not only the existence of these programs, but the evidence he had compiled. He had names, dates, facilities, financial records, and even veterans willing to speak on the record. For Murphy, this was more than a research project. It was a moral obligation. He understood that exposing these programs could save lives, protect veterans, and prevent further abuse. At the same time, his findings made him a target. Government agencies, including intelligence and law enforcement organizations, monitored individuals they perceived as threats, especially those with credibility and public influence. By 1969 and 1970, internal documents later revealed through declassification suggest that Murphy was indeed under surveillance. The FBI monitored his phone calls, mail, and movements, placing informants in his social circle. He was classified under CONTLPRO, the same counterintelligence program used to track civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and other perceived domestic threats. These actions highlight the extraordinary level of attention paid to a decorated war hero whose primary aim was exposing wrongdoing and advocating for vulnerable veterans. Murphy continued to compile and organize his findings, meeting with legal counsel, arranging for whistleblowers within the VA to have protection, and scheduling meetings with investigative journalists from prominent newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. By mid-1971, Murphy had assembled a detailed dossier that, if made public, could have revealed unethical and possibly illegal activities within government programs. It is in this context that the circumstances of his death acquire a chilling dimension. The timing of his fatal flight, the unusual activity in the hangar the night before, and the evidence of sabotage on his aircraft suggest the possibility that forces opposed to his exposure to these programs may have taken deliberate steps to prevent him from speaking out. Murphy, a man who had survived some of the most dangerous situations imaginable on battlefields across Europe, now faced a threat of a different kind. A silent, bureaucratic, and technologically sophisticated danger that sought to remove him quietly before his findings could reach the public. This period of Murphy's life underscores not only his bravery, but also his moral clarity and dedication to truth. He had spent decades as a soldier defending his country, risking life and limb in the heat of combat, and now he faced a battle of another kind, one that required intelligence, foresight, and courage of a different kind. The very skills that had allowed him to survive the war, discipline, observation, persistence, and strategic thinking, were now being applied to uncover wrongdoing and protect others. What makes this phase of his life so remarkable is that Murphy operated not for recognition or reward, but out of principle. His investigation into the VA programs, the covert psychological experiments, and the systems that endangered veterans speaks to his enduring sense of responsibility, his unwillingness to ignore injustice, and his readiness to confront powerful institutions despite the personal risk involved. In many ways, his work in these final months shows that the heroism of Audie Murphy extended far beyond the battlefield. It encompassed the courage to confront bureaucracies, challenge authority, and demand accountability on behalf of those who could not protect themselves. On the morning of May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy boarded a small Aero Commander plane at Martinsville Airport in Virginia, accompanied by 5 others and piloted by Herman Butler, a seasoned aviator with an extensive flight record. To the casual observer, it was an ordinary flight, but the events that followed transformed it into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Butler, an instrument-rated pilot with 8,000 hours of experience, made decisions during the flight that would later raise serious questions. He flew unusually low over the mountainous terrain, well below the minimum safe altitude for that region, and into dense fog, conditions that for most pilots would have been perilous. For an experienced aviator like Butler, these decisions were not accidental. They appeared deliberate, a conscious choice to maintain the aircraft in a zone where danger was heightened. Witnesses on the ground reported hearing a loud explosion in midair, followed several seconds later by the sound of the plane crashing into Brush Mountain. One of the most compelling accounts came from Harold Simmons, a 17-year-old working on his family farm nearby. Simmons